Wowee, I sure am having a lot of fun playing Wonderlands. This game is a lot better than I thought it would be. I can't wait to see what they have in store for the future. Wonderlands has been out for over 3 years now, and with Borderlands 4 coming out later this year, I wanted to revisit this game and see just how it's holding up. If you don't know what Tiny Tina's Wonderlands is, well, it's a spin-off from the Borderlands series, based on Borderlands 2 DLC, Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep, which is inspired by Dungeons & Dragons. Although, in this world it's called Bunkers and Badasses, I'm assuming because of copyright issues. You play as the newbie, who is a blank slate, literally. When the player is introduced, they're an unpainted minifigurine because you haven't created your character yet. Yep, that's right, you create your own character instead of the usual 4 vault hunters you choose from in the other games. After customizing your character's looks, you get to choose from 6 pretty fun classes, 7 if you include the DLC, and with multi-classing, you get up to 21 different class combinations. Tiny Tina is the Dungeon Master, or the Bunker Master, and there's also Valentine and Fret, who are kind of just there, I guess. She takes you through her crafted story that ends up getting derailed by the main villain, the Dragon Lord, who is hinted to have gained his own consciousness, and is trying his darndest to throw a wrench in Tina's narrative. The story is much shorter than Borderlands 3, having around 16 hours of main story content, and Borderlands 3 having around 23 to 30 hours of main story content. Even though it's much shorter, I would say the pacing is actually a lot better, a lot more fluid. The main story doesn't overstay its welcome. They do a good job of keeping me interested in what's next. Wonderlands also has some really good side quests, and they generally feel more interactive and fun. There are some fetch quests, but they didn't throw in a million of them just strictly to pad out the game. This is still very much a Borderlands game, so if you're a fan of the usual gameplay loop, then you're going to love this game. Maybe even like it more than Borderlands 3, especially if you're into fantasy and D&D, and, well, if you really hated Borderlands 3's story. In terms of the gunplay, it's pretty much the exact same as Borderlands 3. Now, that could be a good or bad thing depending on what you were expecting from a Borderlands D&D inspired game. After all, this isn't just a DLC like Dragon's Keep was. This is technically a new IP, a whole new game. So you would expect them to really change some things up, and in some ways, they did do that with melee and adding spells, which I will talk about a little bit later. But with guns, they're pretty much the same. Gunplay in Borderlands 3 was phenomenal, and it translates really well to Wonderlands. So it's not that big of a problem. It's just good, fun gameplay. I've seen some complaints that the weapons aren't fantasy enough, and while some people might roll their eyes, I actually think it's a valid criticism. What they did wasn't terrible, but could have been executed way better. The main complaint for me was that there wasn't enough variety, especially with fantasy guns. I'm not against there being weapons from Borderlands games, and I'm not against there being futuristic weapons, but there definitely wasn't enough fantasy weapons. They just didn't make enough models specifically for this game, which is a shame because they came up with some of my favorite looking gun models in all of Borderlands. Like, for example, my favorite was the shotgun that has a cauldron on it with crystals spouting out of it, and to reload you sprinkle some dust over it. That is unique as hell, and I wish we saw a lot more models like this one. The most common fantasy model they put into the game across all the different companies was the crossbow gun hybrid, including the Jacobs company, which was renamed Black Powder for this game, has mostly crossbow gun hybrids instead of black powder guns. It just felt like the crossbow hybrid was overused, like they made a couple of unique looking models and then went, okay guys, we have enough, let's just copy and paste this crossbow into half the guns. I was also disappointed that there weren't any actual bows. Yes, I know one of the Spore Warden's abilities is a bow, but I'm sorry, that is just such a cop-out. Instead of creating a few bows, we're not even asking for a lot, just give us a few. They give us a single bow ability. It feels very wrong to fight a bunch of enemies that wield bows, but we can't loot one for ourselves. Hell, we don't even get a crossbow that's not a hybrid gun. So there's no bows, no real crossbows, no wizard staves, no throwing weapons, no slings, and not many magical weapons in general. There's a real lack of fantasy weaponry. I wish they would have done the gun manufacturing companies the way they did in Borderlands, where each company makes a different style of weapon, and then mash those styles with fantasy. Like, for example, Hyperion could have been the crystal guns, Dahl could have been the crossbow gun hybrids, and Jacobs could have been the black powder gun company, like the company name states. It would have been an easy excuse to have some more modern guns in the game, because older style weapons sometimes have a place in fantasy. Oh, and Maliwan not being in Wonderlands is a tragedy. I mean, how do you not have the one company that only makes elemental weapons in the fantasy game? Come on. But like I said, the gunplay is still very fun, even if they didn't change much. And if you like looter shooters, then you're going to like this game. Something that had a significant change, though, was melee. In previous games, unless you were playing a Vault Hunter that had a specific melee tree like Brick, Athena, and arguably the most fun melee character, Krieg, the melee button was mostly used to finish off an enemy when you had to reload your gun. However, in Wonderlands, instead of having a default melee attack, you now loot melee weapons, like axes and hammers and swords. There are a lot of fun options to find, and it has multiple classes that complement it. In one of my playthroughs, I went as a Stabomancer with a Berserker as my second class, and by the end, I was using my melees more than my ranged weapons. They made melee feel a lot more fluid and engaging. It's a lot more satisfying to smack enemies around, and hilarious when one blasts off into space. I really like the lunge attack that they implemented as well. Some weapons move slower but do more damage, like hammers and maces, and vice versa, knives do less damage but swing much faster. Pretty basic stuff. If you can get a nice set of knives that proc elemental effects, then you're going to have a really fun time. The main problem that I have with melee is that it does this weird tracking thing that gets annoying super fast. I have aim assist completely off, but some melee weapons tend to track enemies. It's frustrating and almost made me want to quit my Stabomancer playthrough, but fortunately it wasn't enough because the fun I was having outweighed the issue. This is a tiny complaint, but while I like looting melee weapons, adding a whole nother item type to the loot rotation can be frustrating. If you were hoping for a better pistol or a sniper, and then you see a purple drop, or by golly, even a legendary, you go pick it up and it's just a melee weapon that's nowhere near as good as your current one. Other than maybe tweaking it a little bit so that you get way less melee drops, I actually really hope they continue this melee system in the Borderlands series. They took away grenades and replaced them with spells. At first it was a little jarring for me. It felt like a huge change that could go very wrong, and I was afraid I was going to miss having grenades, but boy was I wrong. There are a lot of different spells, and they are all well done and very fun to use. And honestly, I find myself enjoying Wonderland's takes on spells much more than Borderlands grenades. I think it has to do with spells being on a cooldown versus grenades being a finite resource. You find grenades absolutely everywhere, but there's still that instinct in the back of my brain that's telling me, don't throw this grenade at this perfectly grouped up 4 psychos, you might need it later. Whereas with spells, I spam them as soon as they come off a cooldown. After playing games like Marvel Rivals or Risk of Rain 2, it's just second nature. Something else that stands out for me with the spells, it's a lot more fun finding out what they do, and I never really get bored finding a new spell. With grenades, you're just throwing shit. And while some of the grenades have really cool effects, at the end of the day, you're just lobbing something and it explodes, and maybe it spawns other grenades or something. Borderlands' coolest grenade doesn't beat Wonderland's lamest spell. I wanted to do a whole section on all of the different perks and classes in this game, but to be honest, I don't really think there's much to go off of. Each class has 2 abilities, and some of them are really cool. Like the Stabomancer class has a spell that summons a spinning blade that you can flick around. And some abilities are kind of lame, like the Sporemancer's bow spell, which doesn't even fit the class. The problem with Wonderland's perks is that they don't really change the way that you play the game in any significant way. They're mostly just damage percentage increases, 2% damage increase, 5% magazine increase, 8% health increase, slightly faster regen delay. I don't usually like these kinds of perks in any game because it's almost impossible to tell the difference when you get a 2.5% increase to melee damage. I mean, yeah, you can see the numbers go up ever so slightly, but is it actually that noticeable? And more importantly, I want a perk to feel useful and satisfying, and these types of perks don't do that for me. Borderlands has a similar issue with most of its perks being percentage increases, but they built the perk trees in a way that, depending on where you spend your skill points, it changes the way you play or adds mechanics. For example, with Flak, you have 3 different companions to choose from, and depending on what tree you invest in, you'll change what they can do. Like with the Jabber, who starts out with throwing barrels, if you upgrade the Jabber's tree enough, you can give him a shotgun and an ability to do a massive melee attack. And if you upgrade it further, you can give him a SMG with a rocket launcher. I do like the multi-classing system. When you turn level 20, you get to choose another class, and there are some really neat combinations out there. My first playthrough, I chose Spore Warding and Graveborn because I wanted to have two companions, but I found out Graveborn gave me a lot of lifesteal, and it was what I was missing in my Spore Warding build, so it worked out nicely. Something that bugs me about the Wonderlands perk system is you can't even respec your skill points until after you beat the final boss. You can't really experiment with the perks and classes until you reach the Chaos Trials. Let's talk about vehicles in Wonderlands. There are none. Thank God. Instead, the travel system revolves around something called the Overworld. I can see why some people might not like it or find it a bit out of place, but I thought it fit the theme of D&D very well, showing off this little cute set that Tina built. It reminds me of real-life tabletop RPGs where everyone's shit is everywhere and snacks are in the way, and I hate Borderlands vehicles. I find it very annoying, boring, and time-consuming, driving around long stretches of nothing and occasionally hitting a skag. The Overworld is essentially a map that you walk around on to get to different areas, where you can also find some extra side quests and some shrines that provide stat bonuses. Overall, I think it's a nice change of format and is a great replacement for vehicles. The only complaint I have is that I hate the obvious padding. Having bandits pop out of nowhere to waste your time is super annoying, and clearing out bandit camps only works for a short period of time. Before I talk about the Chaos Trials, I want to briefly mention the boss battles in this game. It's important to talk about bosses first because at the end of every trial, you fight one of the bosses that was in a base game. The boss battles were fine. They weren't that memorable in my opinion, just your basic bullet sponge, immune phase, one-dimensional bosses. The worst offense is the final boss, the Dragon Lord. He was so easy the first time I faced him, it literally took me less than 3 minutes. The credits that they force you to watch afterwards took longer, like way longer. They make you watch what feels like 25 minutes of credits, which is insane. I really liked the Banshee, but that more so stemmed from me liking the aesthetic of the area that she was in, because she was not that good of a boss either. She kind of just stands there while you pump bullets into her, and all you have to do is move left or right, and then back center to avoid her attacks. Oh, and you also have to jump and crouch. I can't forget jumping and crouching, which is a very difficult thing to do. My favorite boss was the normal-sized skeleton, but again, that was because of the setting. I really liked the map, and I liked the quest. The boss itself was not hard. Having to fight these bosses over and over when they're not challenging to begin with is really boring. So what are the Chaos Trials? Well, you know how in previous Borderlands games, after you beat the final boss and done any post-game content that you would want to do, you can start a new game plus and replay the game as your high-leveled Vault Hunter. Wonderlands doesn't have a new game plus. After you beat the Dragon Lord and you recruit him, he invites you to his prison chambers where he explains that in his prison, Tiny Tina stores soul energy or something. I don't know. The explanation he gives is total bullshit. I'm guessing they came up with it last minute or something. Basically, all the Chaos Trials is you enter the portal, it teleports you to one of like maybe 10 arenas, and you fight hordes of basic enemies. Once you defeat all the enemies, you get a little reward, and you rinse and repeat for what feels like forever until you get to the boss. During the trials, you pick up a Chaos Trials specific resource called crystals. You can use them to buy blessings that increase your health or damage, etc., or you can save them and use them at the end of the trial to get some pretty decent loot. I actually think the blessings are pretty cool because there's 100 levels to these stupid ass trials, so when you get to the higher levels, you kind of need the boost that they give you. There are also curses, which are identical to the Mayhem mode of Borderlands 3, and I liked Mayhem mode, so the curses aren't that bad of an idea. They make the game more challenging on top of the difficulty of whatever chaos level you're on. I think the curses are what made the few runs I did do more bearable because of the variety and the challenge, so I think this was actually a really good move on their part. And look, the trials do give you some pretty good loot if you decide to spend the crystals on opening the rabbit statues. It's just, what's the point? This is it. The Chaos Trials are it. That really cool legendary shotgun you got that shoots like a mortar, You're just going to use that in the mind-numbingly repeating arena where all you do is shoot stuff without a break. You might be thinking, yeah, but this is the type of game where all you do is shoot stuff anyways, so what's your issue? I don't think Borderlands or Wonderlands has the best writing, or the best exploration, or the best characters, but it's all decent enough that I still want to experience the whole package and not just the shooty-looty part of it. It's not enough of a reason for me to stick around and keep playing. As it stands right now, it's a huge letdown. And look, if you're into Borderlands because you like shooting stuff and you want to do just that and nothing else without any breaks in between, no dialogue, none of the quirky missions, no exploration, and you don't care about seeing the same arenas over and over, then this is going to be your favorite part of the game. And I'm not judging you, I get it. I think something like the Chaos Trials can have a place in this game, just not the endgame place. If it was a separate mode, then yeah, I could see myself maybe giving it a try every now and then in between missions. How it is now though, being the endgame, I couldn't stomach doing it for more than 2 or 3 times. I don't personally see the value of playing the Trials for very long, other than maybe trying to beat all 4 of the secret raid bosses, one of whom is Tiny Tina herself, which is cool, probably the best part of the Chaos Trials, but it's not enough. I left the story section last because there's really not much to it, and it's much shorter since it's a spin-off game instead of a full game. It's not anything groundbreaking, but it's not bad. A lot of people praise it for having a much better story than Borderlands 3, and I'm not sure if that's exactly right. I think Wonderland's story is only slightly better, and I think Borderlands 3 gets a lot more hate than it deserves. None of the Borderlands games have an amazing story. I think they're all pretty mid. Not anything revolutionary, but enough to keep me somewhat interested. Was there a lot of cringe in Borderlands 3? Oh yeah. Yeah, tons. Especially with the main villains. But there was also a lot of cringe in Borderlands 2 that I don't think enough people bring attention to. And Wonderlands also has its fair share of cringe.
Just how dank are we talking? I need a dank ranking. You gotta rank the dank. If I'm being frank, you gotta rank the dank.
Oh, you need me to crank out a dank rank?
Dialogue has always been a huge problem with Borderlands. I've always felt they try to be edgy in your face, and that kind of humor is really hard to pull off. Characters like Tiny Tina herself, Claptrap, Mr. Torg are good examples of this, as they're very in-your-face, screaming high school toilet humor jokes constantly, non-stop. Something Borderlands would greatly benefit from is being able to skip dialogue. Please, for the love of all that is holy, please add skippable dialogue in Borderlands 4. Borderlands is notorious for leaning heavily on pop culture references. It's always been annoying for me, especially when it's so obvious. But what I loved about Wonderlands is that they used a lot of folklore and fantasy references instead. From having a whole Smurf side quest to King Arthur, and even references from Monkey Island and The Witcher. My favorite map in the whole game is the Jack and the Beanstalk map, because when I got the mission from the little bean to plant him somewhere, I wasn't really sure where it was going, and when the giant beanstalk lifted the whole town, my jaw dropped when I learned that I had just created an area to go into. And the cherry on top was the quest where you're turned small and you find your way through a normal-sized house and beat the normal-sized skeleton. I was afraid going into Wonderlands that spending the entire time having to listen to Tina was not going to go well, but it wasn't that bad. I think they toned her back a little bit to make her more bearable in the long term. That's not to say she doesn't have her annoying, quirky moments.
No. Tina don't play no more, okay? But it's all good. I got mega tons of questicles simmering up in my brain sauce, baby.
The overarching story is that she's trying to cope with the loss of Roland. You find voice notes from someone called the Note Taker, who is very clearly Roland. She didn't get to play with him again, and she feels regretful about her first games with him. The Dragon Lord is the first Fate Maker she ever made with him. And you could say that her using him as the main villain for all of her D&D sessions means she's sad she didn't get to play with Roland again, and she sees herself as a bad person. I liked Dragon Lord. They went with a dry humor personality for him, and it worked out fine enough. He has some funny moments here and there, and I think he's well written. Nothing too notable on the overall design of the character. What made the Dragon Lord interesting was him breaking the immersion and screwing with the game, making it seem like he was growing his own conscience. My favorite moment of the Dragon Lord is when he cuts off Queen Butt Stallion's head and everyone is confused as to what the hell just happened. How did this NPC do something so drastic without the DM's knowledge? I really wish they would have leaned more into that aspect, because it made the story way more interesting. Is the Dragon Lord a character that became sentient? Or is it just Tiny Tina being a mentally unwell person? I personally think it's the latter, since it does happen in some D&D games where a character becomes self-aware. It's also not that popular to do because people like to be immersed, and having a Deadpool character in your session can be annoying and weird. However, I still think Dragon Lord works for Wonderlands. Valentine and Fred are kind of there. They don't add much to the game. I think the characters themselves are okay. They have some funny moments here and there. I liked when they opposed each other just like real people would do at a tabletop game. There's some character development where they get over their grievances with the way they play and accept their differences. Story-wise, there isn't much there except for the fact that we learned Valentine crashed his ship. It's unfortunate that they weren't actually a part of the game, because I could think of so many ideas that would have been funny. Like Valentine trying to slay a monster and rolling a 1, and then you have to revive him. Or Fred stealing something from a noble and ending up in prison and having to go rescue her. They could have had their own special quest or helped out with some of the bosses or something, anything. There's so many scenarios that they could have done with these two characters that would have added much immersion and depth. I'm guessing that they chose the advisor route because they ran out of time and money. It was just easier to add a couple of more voices to the game instead of actually putting them in it. Could you imagine going to your weekly D&D session and the dungeon master saying that only one person could play the game and everyone else just has to sit there and watch and can only give a little input here and there? It sounds boring as hell. Lastly, let's talk about the main character. Since you create your character from scratch, you're not really getting the life and personality that you would from previous Vault Hunters. Although I would say it's not that big of a deal, considering we don't see or hear much from the Vault Hunters from any of the games anyways. All we ever get is a few voice lines and a couple of echo logs. Making your own character, it makes a lot of sense. It's a D&D inspired game, and I thought it was a really interesting choice. I remember the first time I loaded up the game and got to the character creation, my jaw hung open because I never thought in a million years that a Borderlands game, spin-off or not, would do something like creating your character and then choosing a class. In conclusion, I think Wonderlands is a decent game, but I would probably wait for some sort of sale if you're interested in getting it. I didn't cover the DLCs for this game because they are nothing burgers. They are terrible and not worth a single penny unless you desperately want to try the one single extra class. This is a tried and true Borderlands game, so if you're a fan of the series, you're going to be a fan of this game. Fun and engaging combat, good variety, not the greatest story or characters, but decent enough to get you interested, and lots of loot. The biggest problem that takes a lot of points off for me is the Chaos Trials. I think that hits this game very hard. I could have looked past the trials if they at least had an option for a New Game Plus to keep playing with your high-level character, but they don't. I would give this game an overall 6 out of 10. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and clicking that bell for notifications.